thought this time I might share some of the things that I picked up at the recent Converge Conference in Sydney. It was a great conference, and we followed that on by the International Association for the Study of Youth Ministry with more academic papers, but Converge was great, particularly presented often with speakers encouraging conversation and feedback. So that was great. So here's some of what I picked up. We started with Mark McCrindle from McCrindle Research, and he was exploring with us Gen Alpha. So we got a lovely little sheet. It's some things about Gen Alpha. So you can see there, it talks about the populations and the number of Gen Alphas and where they'll probably get to. You can see who's in the workforce now and those sorts of things. And what's stood out in their times. On the other side, you can see, for them, iconic toys, e-bikes. Their music devices are digital audio players. They look for enlarging leadership styles, and their screen content is AI content. So he explored that life is changing for Gen Alpha, and that the world is about change and expanding. But particularly of interest for us, he looked at some things about faith, understanding of faith in Australian society. So here's some interesting things on there. You'll notice on the graph on the left that the number of percentage of Australians identifying as with Christianity is going down, but the percentage of Australians attending church is going up. So there's some encouragement that people are connecting with church. We might not have as many, but those that we do, they're really connecting and attending with church. And look on the right graph, the percentage of Australians warm to Christianity. 65% now it's had an upkick, are warm, they're open to it. And 19% of Australians say they're open to changing their religious views. And the top reasons people turn to Christianity: feeling a spiritual connection or sense of divine presence. 2, finding personal meaning and purpose through Christianity. Or 3, Christianity offers answers to questions they can't find elsewhere. So there's some interesting statistics, and some statistics that suggest there's hope. We can often get caught up in the, our numbers are dwindling, but there's hope. There's hope. On the other side, the proportion of 15 to 24-year-olds Christians moving to no religions, so that's continuing to go up, 36%. Proportion of Christians moving to no religion overall is 19%. But, you might go, that's really bad. But, however, young Australian Christians are much more likely to be regular church goers than older generations. So Christians who attend church at least monthly, Gen Z, 68%. So for Gen Z, if they say they're Christian, they're going to live it out. So whereas the others, in statistics, older generations, boomers, I'm a Christian, but I never go to church. If Gen Z is in, they're in. If I'm a Christian, then I'm going to church. If I don't go to church, then I'm probably not a Christian. So there's some really great things in what Mark McCrindle said. So that was good to share. There was some interesting conversation. There was a bit of a panel about that and what that meant. Then I went in and heard Mel Hanger talk a little bit about ministry in transitions, youth to young adulthood. And it's looking at how do we help young people as they head into young adulthood, as they move from high school out. Some great tips that I picked up from different people around the room is one of them encourages their families, as their kids are in year 12, go for a holiday to the place where your child is going to go to university. So during that year before, not just before, but a while before, and go and check out the place, get familiar with the area, find a church that they might connect with, and spend some time helping them to, this is where you're going to be. Get ready for that. Another one said, as you put up missionary post pictures in your church, so put up those young adults who have gone off to uni and stuff. They're doing mission there in that sense. They're going off and being into the world to share faith. Let's be thinking of them and praying for them and keeping that connection. So some wonderful things there about how we keep connection with our young people. Just looking at what we did. We then, on the second morning, we got to hear about the video for, we've forgotten it, Your Story. So a number of years ago, Converge did a big research project on faith in young people in Australia. And the results was the Your Story report, which you can find online and read. But they have been going around and sharing with those results. I heard some of that at the Leaders to Go conference last year. But they're now putting together video content that churches can work through by themselves, because obviously there's a small team at Converge and they can't get everywhere. So how do they enable us? So looking forward to that all coming out. They showed us the first video and got our feedback. And so they might do some re-editing there just to help. But looking forward to when those come out, we'll be looking at what congregations in the Hunter and in the expanding Northern Presbytery, where that might be helpful, where it might not be Growing Young that's helpful, but Your Story, which encourages people to think about where are young people. And they're encouraged to think about their own young person and who that is and how they might be helpful. So the research, they talked to 439 young people between 16 and 20 and different connections through church. So be looking out for that. Then I got to hear Offa and her colleague from Virginia from Vic Tas Synod talking about discipling second generation young people from families that have come from overseas, and was really interesting. And that sense of how do we hear their story? How do we hear who they are? How do we understand that life is different for them? They were sharing that, if there's a major event like a funeral or a birthday, then as an islander, you drop everything and you go and focus on that for a time, and then you come back to it. And how do we key that into our relationships with our islander people? Oh, okay, you haven't just dumped and ignoring us. You've got this important thing on, and how do we allow you that space to do that? It was really interesting. But also, I'd never heard that. So how do we hear these things to understand them? Then got to hear Kelly Woods from the Vic Tas Synod talking about digital and discipleship and her involvement in the digital space, and how do we find those spaces of religious practice in online, that people are looking online for answers, and so how are we present? Not to convert it into a church as we know it, but to be present and to share faith in those places, and that there are spiritual practices that naturally lead themselves to be online. So how might we do that? It was really interesting. I'm not a big gamer, but have spent a bit of time online chatting type stuff, and was interesting to hear. Then heard Steve Forward talk about the loneliness epidemic, and that statistic for 10 to 17-year-olds, 79% have used an AI companion, 20% use one daily, 8% have a dedicated AI companion. So they're connecting with these because they're looking for help. It's used for 33% situational advice, 22% feeling or life changes, 33% physical health advice, 20% mental health and well-being support. So these young people are looking for help, and how might we support them? How might we be looking out for those that just like solitude, or those that find themselves isolated? So sort of talked about, you have people who are isolated and people who are not isolated. You have people who are lonely and people who are not lonely. So how are we looking for the people who are lonely and isolated. They're our priority group. Lonely, isolated, not lonely. They're happy being alone. The lonely but not isolated, the person that feels a bit alone in the crowd, and then the not isolated, not lonely. Most people, they're just happy, got friends around. That's wonderful. How are we looking? And encourage us to think about what is the deeper thing. What are the deeper causes for loneliness? One person, as we were talking, talked about a resource called Tree of Life that I need to look at, that talks about, your roots are who spoke into you. The ground is where you are now, and the trunk is your value, and the leaves is what's sprouting. So helping you to think through who you are and where you're at. And so, some great resources for us to be thinking about. Important for us to be thinking about how are we supporting those who are feeling lonely, because this generation, researchers said, is the loneliest generation. So how are we supporting them? How are we getting involved in online material? How can we use your story type resources? And how do we engage and look at some of the positive statistics coming out? So, had a great time. Maybe next time there's a Converge conference, you might want to be there. It was wonderful. One of our people from Canberra, there's a church in Canberra that's been looking for a youth worker and has just put someone on, but one of their key leaders came along because she doesn't work for the church, but she's sort of leading that area, so she wants to know about it. If she's going to be on church council and advocate for that area, what's going on. So you don't have to be a youth worker to come to these events, but it was exciting. Hope that gives you some food for thought. Something springs out to you there, please be in contact and we can have a conversation about it. Until next time, bye.